Hi, everybody. My name's Jessica Hallgren. I'm the women's groups pastor here at Beltway Park Church, and we're so excited to have you with us for our May Gather group video. With me, I have.
Audrey Adkison.
And Audrey, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, life story, what you do, all the things?
Yes. So I'm originally from Texas. I grew up until I was 7 in South Lake, and then my family started moving around when I was in second grade. So we had to stop in Ohio and Michigan, and in fourth grade, we lived in Maine. And so Maine was a really awesome place to grow up, because it really felt like our family were missionaries in the United States. Maine is 4% Christian, and so I really grew up having, the decision in my face of who was I going to follow. Was I going to follow my, my friend group, who were doing things that I knew that my family what didn't do, who were involved in even like witchcraft things. There, it was a very dark culture, and so it was, will I follow this culture, or will I follow my family's culture that follows Jesus? And so I remember in 7th grade deciding, okay, God, I'm gonna wake up and spend time with you if you wake me up, and I'll follow you, and I'll do the things that you would want me to do. If not, then I'm going to follow my friends and do what they do. And so that was a really sweet time with God, because every morning he would say true and wake me up, and I would read the word, and journal my prayers, and that's where I became just really his follower. And so that gave me some roots for high school when, life gets rowdier and crazier as you grow up. And so that gave me roots in high school when, um, yeah, the darkness was even closer. And so, there's, you're making decisions every day of, again, like, who is your heart going to follow? And is it going to be submitted to your will or the Father's? And so, yeah, God gave our family really awesome opportunities um, to help a plant church grow, and to have impact on people that didn't even know how he died. And so that was special. Then I had a crisis of faith when I got to a Christian university, because I was like, I'm always the different one, but now I'm like everyone else here. I believe the same things they do. And so that was really important to me. Another part of that was I was kind of in talks with a guy that was atheist, and so that also played into my faith crisis. And then I worked through that with God, and it was through that time alone in the morning that he just continued to reveal himself and pursue me. And I coached soccer at Central Arkansas, and then at Liberty University, and at those places, um, the the church families that I was a part of, they were just huge for me and my um, and just my life, because you're in your 20s and you're on your own. And for me, I was kind of starting to move across the country. I came here 3 years ago. I was, I would get into a community at church, and then usually find someone and start dating them. And those church communities were what kept me um, staying true to God. And I'm forever grateful for all of the older women that spoke into my life, because they said the hard thing, and they weren't afraid of how I was, going to respond, but they loved me enough to speak into my life and to redirect me, and even help me um, through deliverance. And so I'm here at Beltway now, and I'm so thankful to be in Abilene.
So, tell us what you do here in Abilene.
I'm a soccer coach at ACU.
All right. And you ended up in Abilene kind of like there was like an interesting story about how you ended up here. So,
Yes.
how did God plant you here in Abilene with us?
Yes. Well, I was coaching at Liberty, and um, I I knew the new coach at Abilene Christian, and he reached out to me and asked me to come be his assistant. And I wasn't, ready to leave Liberty. I wasn't planning on leaving. And I did my pros cons list, and it was, cons for, just me professionally and, where I was at in life. And so I talked to my dad through it, and my dad was like, Audrey, you need to call him and, let him know it's a no. And I talked to my mom about it, and she said, Audrey, your dad's a great dad, but you need to ask God. And so I was like, oh goodness, I'm afraid of what God will say, because, sometimes he throws curveballs. But
Yes.
I got before God, and it was like, it happened to be, so my current boss had given me a week to make a decision. And so I had held off, and an hour before, he called me to see, what the decision I had made was. I got before God, and I was like, look, you have 1 hour to totally convince me. And I will say the 6 hours before that, I did worship, and I had a heart where I was like, okay, I'm going to surrender to whatever he says. I'm going to be like excited because he knows better than me. But whenever it was that hour came, I was like, okay, I'm going to read my normal reading for the day and talk to you, and if you want me there, I know that you'll show me. And so at the time I was reading through Luke, and the chapter I was in, I want to say it was either the first chapter or the third chapter, but the very first verse had the word Abilene in it. And my heart started racing, and I was like, no way, this is in the Bible. Did you put this here? And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to over spiritualize this, God. I think you want me there. But if you do these three things, then I'll know like this is from you. And so he did, and even more so than what I'd ask him to. And so, yeah, that's what brought me to Abilene. And I've had this sense of peace since I've been here, knowing that this is where God brought me, and I don't have to double think like, oh, should I do this, or should I, should I be, there's no second guessing, because I know that he orchestrated it.
Well, it's such a blessing to have you here in Abilene and have you coaching and influencing young ladies' lives in our city. I'm so thankful for you. I love that you're a soccer coach at ACU with a bunch of young ladies, and you also serve in student ministry here at Beltway with young ladies. And so just even thinking about your 7th grade, getting up and spending time with God and the way that you've looked to God, your life, like your life is a legacy. And that's something we've been talking about, is just that string of legacy. But just that relationship that you've carried with him leading all the way up to this. And I know that that's something that you desire and already are pouring into your girls on the soccer team and the girls in student ministry. And so you do like retreats and different things for the young women on your team. And it's just incredible. I'm just so thankful for you. And so part of legacy is, I always go back to Genesis, where God says, be fruitful, multiply, take dominion over the earth, that he created man. And he said that it wasn't good for man to be alone. Everything was good. Everything was very good. But the thing that wasn't good was that man should not be alone. And so he created him the helpmate, which is the Ezer Kenegdo, which doesn't mean that it's beneath, but this person is like like the Ezer Kenegdo could be described almost like Holy Spirit with Jesus, like it's a very much a partner. It's like in the matrimony of a man and woman is like the Trinity. It's, it's not, but it's a Trinity. It's him, you, and God. It's that cord of 3 strands, which is super sweet. But in talking to a lot of young women, and part of what spawned me inviting you here today is just the struggles in dating relationships in today's current culture. And I'm Gen X. I have baby boomer friends. I have millennial friends. I have Gen Z young ladies in my house all the time. And I guess my youngest daughter could be Alpha or Z, depending on, but we're around Gen Alpha too. And so it's just kind of interesting listening to my girls talk about things, listening to college age young women that I'm around talking, just different women talk about dating and relationships and how things are. And so the way that dating looks now looks a lot different than it did even back in, if you think about my grandmother or my parents or my generation. And so, can you just, there's Tinder. I don't even know what that is. I don't even know what some of these dating apps are, but I know lots of young women that they want to meet somebody, they want to meet a nice Christian man, and they get on these Christian dating apps, which has kind of become like a thing, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And there's like men trolling and like wanting something different, like maybe putting up a front, but it actually ends up being something completely different. Anyway, not that you need to explain all that to us, but can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? Because part of, as generation, like for me as a mother, and I know even my mom as a grandmother and the people that I'm friends with here, we want to know how we can pray for the generation and just meet you guys.
Yes. Yes. It is an interesting landscape for dating right now. Especially, you know, I think part of it is there is such a heavy influence from the world of what it should look like because there's so many TV shows like our music, um like our Instagram reels, it's showing us this picture of what it should look like for a man and a woman to be together, but that's very different from what God wants it to look like. And so it's easy to confuse of like, um, you know, God cares about where our heart is. And so sometimes we can be doing, church, this, that, the other thing, and find a man that's doing church, that, small group, whatever, but our hearts can be far. And and then whenever we try and date, it looks like the world's version of a dating relationship. And so I really think, you know, as young women and as older women, is like praying for our hearts to be close to God, because then like he's going to show us a brand new map of what dating looks like and what how to move forward like in a relationship, how to step out of a relationship. But if our hearts are far and we're listening to the world, even we can still be doing the right things in terms of, going to church or, um, professing Jesus. Um, and so yeah, it is an interesting landscape. And like, if we're formed by, the reality TV shows, then we're going to have these results of really broken and, relationships that are like two people on mission running, um towards the Father and with the Father, and um letting him plant the future ground. It's um yeah, swayed by darkness. And so um I think the most important thing is where our heart is, because he will direct us, even whether or not to get on an app or which app to use, or when, if there's a guy that there's a match, okay, like how do I move forward. But with that is it's so important to be in community with older women, because I right now we have a really hard time, like peer groups have a hard time saying don't do it or to really speak truth. But older women have wisdom and they see things that we can't see, especially if we're blinded by the dream of marriage, family, kids, like these things. um Older women have wisdom that we need, and that we need to be able to really be open, even confessional, with the older women in our life, so that God can do what he made the church body to do, and be there for each other, and help redirect us. And then as young women, it's important that we're not easily offended, because it's, someone's already taking a step to share something with you. If they see that you're misstepping, or you're not yourself, or you're losing your identity. And so we need to step towards them with grace and an openness of heart to listen. One story I have is, um, I I was living somewhere else, and I was in a relationship, kind of in and out of a relationship with a guy, and a woman at church pulled me aside, and we had a good relationship, but she was like, Audrey, I have something to tell you, and I know that you'll receive it, but it's really hard for me to tell you, but I just got to tell you. And I was like, well, just tell me, what is it? And she was like, um, this morning I read in Proverbs, um, it was like this, for all I remember is the phrase, I don't remember the whole verse, but a man returns to his vomit. And she said, God showed me like, this is you and your relationship. And so she was like, do it do with it as you would, but I need to deliver this message to you. And you know, through that, God totally redirected my life journey, because really, if you continue walking in one direction, then your trajectory will get, you know, further and further away, if you're not redirected, to stay aligned with what God has for you. And so I'm super thankful that she was willing to share that with me, and I want, I want to have the courage to be able to share with other people hard, sometimes it's good, words from God, but sometimes it is hard. And so um this spirit um of I guess having grace and not being offended, it is huge for being able to walk in alignment with Jesus.
So I would say that of course, we talked about this a little bit before we hopped on here, that I'm like a statistics and people studying nerd like that. And what I've heard is that in the different age groups, and it kind of starts with your generation, that the communication is a little bit harder than what it used to be. People are a little bit more easily offended, but it's hard to have, I mean, you could say it's hard to have healthy conflict. And I know we don't like the word conflict because it sounds like we're fighting with each other.
Mhm.
But part of what that woman did with you would be what I would call healthy conflict. And I think that there can be a hesitation in some of the generations to say something to you because you don't know how it's going to be met. But there can also be a hesitation in the younger generations,
Mhm.
like obviously not wanting to be controlled. There has to be that balance of Jesus, but I've heard that it's harder to have conversations such as like defining a relationship. Where are we at? Where are we not at? What do you want? What do you not want? That those things can have like really adverse reactions. That that there is a that statistic that shows starting in the millennial generation and going down that it's harder and harder to have just really constructive conversations. And it's like super easy. Okay, we're friends, or
Mhm.
no, I want to pursue something more, or whatever it is. And so, would you say that that's true? And what has that looked like? And what advice would you give to people you're in, you know, in those generations about things they can do to maybe not be so protective or
Mhm.
whatever, but also to other generations and how to pray or even begin to interact with the younger generations to help bridge
Mhm.
that gap? Does that
Yeah.
make sense? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a big, long.
Yeah. Well, texting has brought in a whole nother layer of just accessibility. And so I think kind of with that, it's almost been, um, we've been tempted to not be as committal, because we're like, okay, well, what if like I get a text from this other person, or what if we, kind of, there's been a temptation to have like multiple, kind of things going, options available. And I think our love for variety as like a culture has increased. And so, that's also kind of decrease our commitment level, because we're always thinking like there could be something better, there might be, um other options. And so, um when it comes to dating, there's almost like phases, and every relationship looks different, but there's always like the phase of like, okay, there's interest, and then there's, the next step is commitment of, I mean, a small commitment of dating, and then, the hope would be to get engaged and then get married. And so what would my I guess the biggest thing in my life that, okay, so I'm 31, and um, the biggest thing that's changed in my life that's brought me to where I'm at peace and I'm content with my life. I feel like I have a full life. And yes, like I have that desire for marriage. Um, but it's not, it's not oppressing me. And so I think the biggest shift that where, because I haven't always been like this in my mid 20s, I was very, um, I was like needy. And part of that was because I consistently, you know, had always had someone that I was kind of talking to. So like we would be texting or, hanging out or whatever, and not necessarily dating. At times there was guys that I was in a dating relationship with, but there's finally a time where I was like, okay, I am not going to respond to text messages, um, or give any sort of hope unless I'm interested in dating this person and they're interested in dating me. Like if we're both on the same page with that and then we start dating, then okay, like we'll continue talking. But it wasn't until 26 I was driving home from work and God showed me, Audrey, what are you doing? Like this is a waste of, again, it's about our heart. Like you're putting your heart out there and it's going up and down with like these um with these different relationships that aren't true relationships. And so part of that was the putting the conversation out there of, okay, are you interested in dating me? All right. If not, like, I'm not responding to you. We're not talking. I'm not picking up your phone calls. I'm not hanging out with you one on one. That all I had to have really clear cut boundaries. And, you know, I think again with texting, it's like the accessibility of older, and I know for the older generation, it's probably more so through Facebook, but like older friendships or relationships from, high school, college, whatever, that's easier to reconnect with people. And so again, it's like having those clear boundaries and letting our heart only need, you know, I guess it's identifying that our heart needs God and like that He can satisfy. And if we don't know what that actually means or looks like, then we need to seek Him and ask Him to show us.
You were talking about people canceling people. Like if they try to, in our house, we call it DTR, define the relationship. And so even if there is that conversation that's innocent, like, hey, I'm cool if we're friends, like you're cool if they're friends, but then you're just going to set different boundaries. So you've seen this as a pattern. Can you talk about that or?
Yes. So instead of having, yeah, a hard conversation, maybe asking a question that, someone has to be frank with where they're at, and what they're seeing for the future. Um, there has been like I would say probably more so for the younger generation, um, it's like, oh, we're not going there, or yeah, we're not going there, so I'm going to cancel you, and that's basically isolating you out of um whatever friend group I'm a part of. And yeah, there's a very strong um just defiance against any conversation that includes conflict, includes um just something that's uncomfortable. And
like accountability or something.
yes. And so um for us, it's like, okay, how can we be so strong in our identity in Christ that we don't have a huge identity wound or like a fear of rejection that prevents us from having tough conversations and being honest. And that all starts with being honest with ourselves, and then we're able to be honest with other people. And um but yeah, there is like, it's like a wall up between um people having hard conversations or even real conversations, because then that what follows is a level of a commitment, accountability. And I think one thing that's important for us to remember is that like dating has no meaning or power, like even in like our I don't know, this was really important for me to learn. But even within our like judicial system or like our law is like there is nothing um special about dating. Like it is until you're married that that it's recognized by the authorities. And so I think that was helpful for me because I didn't feel like I owed whoever I was dating anything. I didn't feel like I owed them anything. Like, oh, it's because we're dating, it's okay, or I need to do this because we're dating. Like you are not tied to anyone until you're in a covenant marriage with them. And so um I think part of it is like our identities become meshed when we date if we don't have a strong identity in Jesus and like and we're healed. And so sometimes it's easy when we're in a relationship to start being who we think that other person wants us to be, and our identities, like we lose ourself in that relationship, and that's harder for us to see, but it's easier for, again, like your community to see that, or older women in your life that love you. They can start seeing shifts happen. And um so yeah, that would be a prayer is for anyone in a dating relationship to really be strong in their identity, to be able to have hard conversations, to be able to stay true to who they are in Christ, and not be conformed by the relationship, um and yeah, stay, you know, two separate until the covenant of marriage, um to keep to stay in a healthy relationship.
So you've had guys that have, they know everything to say. Like they know all the Christian lingo, they know everything to say, but then when you have like been around them, you can tell that they really don't have a relationship with Jesus. And so, I mean, I don't know, like they know him, maybe they're saved, but there's not like that deep connection like you would have thought when you were talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so what advice, I mean, if you think about like I even remember myself back in the day. um but like that heart's desire for marriage, like you were talking about, even like what you were talking about in your 20s, how do you navigate those conversations with somebody that you like, they're a believer but they're not like everything that they probably look more like the world when it comes to dating
Mm-hmm.
than don't. I mean, obviously there's praying, asking God, all those things, but what are some red flags or things that
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you could give advice to younger women to look at, and
Yes. Yes. Um, okay.
or other women?
Well, this
It
is
could
very
be it could be single women, it could
okay.
be whatever, you know.
Yes, this is very, very practical. But in my high school health class, we had an it was like abusive relationship wheel. And so like you can Google that and you'll find like just a ton of them, and it will have examples of like, okay, if there, something happens, there's a conflict in the relationship, and then all of a sudden they're trying to make up and be super sweet, and then they just say sorry, but then they repeat it. So like there's yeah, the just practically speaking, that abusive wheel, like it's crazy because you never think, sitting in high school health class, you never think like, oh, I'm going to be in one of those relationships until you are, and you're like, oh shoot, what have I got myself into? But I think practically speaking, that's a good tool to use. Let's see, other red flags. Um, I think again, it's when our words and our actions don't align. Because sometimes guys are really good at having, or girls too, really good at having the hard conversation or setting boundaries or whatever. But then if the actions don't align, then there's a huge gap um in our integrity. And so that would be another thing is like, okay, if they can smooth talk, what's the action that backs it up? Um and then I think the other part would be someone that, and this is, I guess, it's more difficult to objectify, but someone that like cares for your heart. Because again, like if if there's someone that's trying to pull you away from, um, I don't know, for me, a lot of times it's like been my family or your church family or, whatever it is, then, that's a definite red flag of,
Or even godly character and righteousness. Like if
yeah,
they're trying to pull you away from that, that's
yes,
even if it's little bits. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, then that's another flag of, and then I think the other part is like being aware, self-aware, of like where, what's my heart doing? Where am I creating temptation? Especially like, I know we don't like to talk about this too much, but even with my clothes, like what am I trying to say with the clothes that I'm wearing? What's my heart's desire of, you know, I put this outfit on, what's going through my mind, and sometimes it's easy to kind of, act like we don't know what we're doing. But in reality, I think and we know where our hearts are at. And so I think it's important to like self check too of like, okay, God, like, am I living in surrender to you? Because I, you know, I want to be I want to be following your will and not my own heart's will that can get so blinded by this relationship. Um and and I want you to be my security. I don't want, even like sometimes I think physical touch can be our security blanket of like, okay, I know that, in church, if they're touching my leg, then I'm okay. Like our relationship's good. But then my heart gets all out of whack if I don't, if we didn't hug that day or whatever. And so again, it's like, where's our heart finding its security and how do we replace that in the middle of God's heart and get security from him.
And that even goes back into the getting canceled thing.
Mhm.
Like, so if you have young women on your soccer team or in your life group at church, what do you tell them when they come to you and they're devastated they got canceled?
Yeah, it's such a good opportunity to get close to God because in that like brokenness, in that place of feeling rejected or um you know questioning, our actions or who we are, like God will meet us there and in a really special way. He's close to the brokenhearted. And so I think that's when we really draw into him and we really draw into our community and we're able to receive his comfort and his encouragement. And he's so excited to give that to us. Um, and so, yeah, I see there's so much opportunity. And a lot of times after hardships, like I always tell myself, when you're stretched, you grow. And so, like, after a breakup or, you know, a cancellation, that's when you get to draw near to the Father and he's going to grow your character and your heart's capacity to receive his love. Um, yeah, there's so many good things that only come from walking through something hard or tricky.
One thing I do notice in that is that the enemy's real quick to slip in there too. And it seems
Mhm.
like probably Mr. Wrong, like when you're in that moment is when you're going to get all the texts from or all the attention from all the places that are going to try to pull you away from yourself when you're hurting. It seems like
Mhm.
that's kind of an opportune moment for the enemy. Have you seen that happen? Like where, yes, it's a great opportunity to draw
Yes.
close to God, but then there's temptation to
Yeah.
be draw close to
Yeah.
another person to try to fill that void, that wound.
Mhm.
Have you?
Yeah. That's really, yeah, that's really true. Because it's like that rebound effect of like, okay, he's gonna, do me this way. Well, I can triple that, or my heart's broken and so I don't really care anymore and I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z. Or um yes, there was like one time in my life where I went in this really, it was a dark state after a breakup of um even struggling with like how much I was eating and it was like saying came into that open part in my soul and um and just kind of kept feeding me lies that I was believing. And so um and thankfully, again, I came through hard conversations with older women. A lot of times our friends don't want to say anything,
Yeah.
but older women were like, Audrey, what's going on? And they helped me get out of that pit. But it is a spot where Satan can come in and, help us not care about, again, our true identity as a daughter of God. Um, and so that is something, yeah, to be aware of and like be on guard and like really, again, like sometimes if your heart's not in the right spot, sometimes your actions precede your heart and you just go to every worship service, you go to every event at church, and then your heart's going to follow you there. And so that would be my encouragement of someone that's, dealing with um, a heartache right now is to just be with the family of God and let God minister to you through them.
That's really good advice.
With dating, it's hard not to be legalistic because there's some very strong and strict rules that we'll read about or hear on panels, and in some of those, like, are huge keys to living just like a faithful life for God. Um, and then sometimes it just brings on shame um, and extra rules that kind of clutter our life. But a couple of things that have been really helpful for me is not hanging out with guys that I'm not dating one on one, and again kind of you know having strong boundaries of who am I talking to, and I want to almost pretend like I'm in a covenant now so that I'm prepared for when I am in a covenant marriage, that I will already have all the habits of what it's like to be committed to one man. um and so that looks like treating the Bible says like treat other guys like they're your brothers, um and so that's one thing that I've in the last few years have practiced, that's really helped me make decision making easier, because I'm like, okay, well, if I was married, I would say no. So say no right now. And I know that that's going to bring good fruit further down the road.
That's really good. So what does that look like practically? Like if you're, because I understand what you're saying, but if you're like saying that to one of the girls on your soccer team or high school, what does it look like to pretend like you're married now, like with your friendships and the guys and other, like what are some key practical things that you can do to look like you're,
I would say like just not entertaining just like the fling or um
because you wouldn't have a fling if you were married.
right. Right. It's almost let me think of some practical
I
ways.
can think of, like with me and my husband, we don't text people of the opposite sex without another, like either without each other or somebody else in the conversation, or we're really careful if we can tell like conversations are getting to a certain, we're just really cautious and
Yes.
with people of
Yes.
the opposite sex.
Yes. So um one thing I can think of is now a lot of my friends are married, and so it's always like conversing with the woman spouse if for information or planning or whatever. um so that would be one way. And so I guess if you're younger, then it would be, yeah, just texting your girlfriends and kind of leaving it at that. And yeah, and just kind of being clear with um if someone wants to hang out, or it's okay to say no. And there's a lot of freedom in that, and God honors that, and he sees our hearts, and he will. One thing I can think of was one morning I was having my quiet time, and I heard God say, like, do not go to ice cream tonight. And I was like, what? And I was like, okay. And that night I was invited to ice cream, and I said yes. And it was like a total rebellion against, what God had shared with me earlier. And like did not play out well. And I was like, man alive, I could have, and that was hanging out one on one with a guy. And so, um, yeah, he keeps us in check. But yeah, I wouldn't have, if you're in a covenant marriage, you're not going to go to ice cream with some other man your own age.
Well, what advice would you give to people praying for the next generation, daughters, granddaughters, whatever it might be, who are in the season of starting to think about dating, maybe starting dating or in it?
Mm.
what advice would you give them and how to pray for them?
Yeah. Um, Again, it goes back to praying for our hearts, that our hearts will stay near to God, and that we'll have clarity to like hear God, to see things as they are, not better or worse than they are, um, and not be blinded by, again, like our own desires, or like the direction of our heart, um that we would be led by God, and that He would be our security. I think so. Again, just praying for their heart, praying for their identity to be strong, um, because again, it's tricky to start dating and start to lose our identity, and so for our identity to be strong and whole, and perfect love drives out fear. And so that fear of rejection to be gone, and for us to receive God's love, and for us to be willing, open to um, hear direction from older people. And then one thing that my mom prays that I think is really powerful is like purity of our mind, our heart, and our body. And so, yeah, that's like God is the one that protects our hearts. And so, really letting us go underneath His authority, um, and being our shepherd to lead our hearts to good places. And um so yeah, hearts, identity, and purity.
That's awesome. I love that. And then what advice would you give to any woman watching, no matter what age, who is in that dating season of life?
Yes. There's a lot of awesome people, but getting to know God, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like spending, even if it's a Saturday night where, you might have a little FOMO, but like spending time with Him and getting to know His heart, and getting to make memories with Him. Like, there is no greater joy, um and He is joy. And so that's one thing, sometimes I think we underestimate how good He is. And so I think getting to know Him, and not focusing so much on the future, or even the past, right? Because sometimes we get caught up in our shame or regret or whatever it might be. But just like locking eyes with Him, and you know just creating a life with Him, and then he'll figure out the rest for us.
I always tell young women and my daughters and that you attract what you project. And so if you are spirit filled, love spending time with Jesus, young lady, you're going to attract spirit filled, love spending time, Jesus, young men. And going back to how you're dressing, if you're like, okay, maybe I need to be a little bit, you know, more revealing so I can attract somebody, again, you attract what you project. And so if you're doing that, you're going to attract a man who's interested in you for your body, not necessarily interested in you for your person. And so you want somebody that's interested in you for who you are. And so whatever it is, if you are not putting God first and you're putting, perfection, whatever it is, that's the kind of person that is going to, obviously there's loopholes to all of this. You're a very beautiful young woman, so I'm sure that there are lots of men that would be attracted, but ultimately, like if you were dressing pretty scandalous, then you're going to attract a lot of men that are interested in your body. But you putting God first, you're going to attract a lot of young men that are in. There's probably, you think about what Scripture says about, the road that leads to righteousness is very narrow, and so I'm sure that it gets more narrow in the quality of people to date. The more that you're projecting that, but then you get that quality of person that you bring into your life, and so that's beautiful. But just remembering that whatever, don't lower your standards, but also don't get too rigid and about it either.
Yeah.
And I was sharing with Audrey before that, like right before I met my husband, my mom bought me this book, and it was talking about the 80-20, and it had you fill out everything that was like an absolute, like, um, that that person had to be. And so I'm checking off these things, and then it had you go back. And so you're thinking like the other things that you didn't check were the 20,
Mm.
like that's what I was thinking. Like I didn't check a lot. So I'm doing good. But then what he had you do was take everything that you said was an absolute and then go back and see, are there 20% of those things that you could actually maybe be okay with? Because there's never going to be a perfect person. And I do think that there's something with all the information that we have, all the podcasts we can listen to, all the things we can listen to from stage, that we're looking for this unicorn that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't exist. And so what are things that you can lay down? Like one of mine was that that the person's parents had to still be married. Well, my current husband's parents are not married, but we've been married, oh my gosh, 18, 19 years. Oh
Mm.
my gosh, I should know that. Shouldn't I? Think we're about to celebrate our 18th wedding anniversary in like 2 weeks. But just thinking about that, like we're still married. But I had this like idea in my mind that if I married somebody whose parents were divorced, then they would be okay with it. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yes.
And so there is something to inviting God in that process, and to not canceling somebody if they don't meet such a rigid line of perfection in your life. Would you?
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
that's my older woman too say.
I love it. And it's so true, because in reality we serve a God that can transform any life, any generational curse. He can do anything. And so it is like very, there's the line between like, okay, God, I'm submitting this to you, and they might not look like what I thought they would. Their past might not look like what I thought it would. Their person might not look like I thought it would, whatever. Um there's that place of surrender, but then there's the other place of um just, okay, it doesn't really matter, I'm ready to be married, and I'm gonna compromise, or um I'm not gonna hold things that I held to a high esteem earlier in my life. And so, but I am with you. Like, I've seen that in my older sister's life, of how um he he dropped all of her standards to three things, and met them, and like the life on mission that her and her husband are leading is truly incredible, and we didn't see any of it coming. So it's been fun, but I know that he does that.
So you're saying God does that? Like God
Yeah.
told your sister to drop this list of standards down to three
Yes.
things, and then when she did that and followed what God was saying, He brought somebody who she might not have even
She wouldn't
considered
have.
before that if she
Yeah.
hadn't really listened to God. And so, I mean, I would think that there are people out there that have this list of standards
Hmm.
from all the podcasts and
Yeah.
whatever it is, and really the standard is what God sets.
Mm.
And again, that doesn't mean like fall off the rails,
Yeah.
but it does mean walking in tight relationship. And if you're not already in that, not just all of a sudden, like, it's not like a genie in a bottle, like, okay, give me my three things, but there is something about that, getting your
Yeah.
heart posture
Yes.
and your relationship solidified with Him. And then when you're in that place where you're really walking in that, then just keeping in that communication. Okay, what are you asking of me in this? What are you saying in this? This is my list, Lord. What's
Mm.
your list?
Mm. Yeah.
And but it really has to come out of the overflow, not just all of a sudden one day.
Yeah, because a lot of times we think we're ready, but he has a different timeline.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much for coming. Would you, I just want to end with you. Would you pray for people that are, just pray for the listeners, those who are praying for women in their life that are seeking godly relationships, and also for the people that are seeking those? So, both.
Yes. Father, thank you so much, just for this opportunity to come before you, on behalf of the women at Beltway. And I just pray, Lord, that you give us your wisdom, and that you give us your peace, and just a heart that is submitted to your will, Father. And I pray that for the other Christian women that are looking for a spouse, Lord, I pray that you just be with their heart and lead their heart to delight in you and to rest in your love, Father. I pray for older women that are in relationships that you will give them just a desire um to model just a great relationship with their spouse, Father, for us to look at. And I pray that you give them wisdom and courage, and even just proximity to younger women that they can speak into, that they can um, just walk alongside and help direct. Um, and I just pray for um, just close relationships that aren't afraid of conflict, that we are able to be so sure of our love from you that it's okay if, we get feedback or we get redirected. And I pray for all the older women, Lord, that they will draw near to the younger generation, and I pray against any judgment or criticism that might be like really easy to give. God, I just pray that their heart um, will just be for the younger generation, and that they will um, help lead us into the abundant life that's only found in you, Jesus. And I just pray, yeah, I just pray a blessing over the marriages, the current marriages, Lord, and the future marriages. And I pray that your spirit will go before and behind us, and that you will be our shield against temptation, against pride, against any division, Lord, because you are the God of unity. And we love you, and we're so thankful for how you designed all of these things. Father, I pray against any resentment or bitterness from previous relationships, or lingering pain or shame. God, I pray that you will just heal all of our hearts, and let us move forward with freedom and joy that comes from you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.